Hello, and welcome to this English methodology workshop. I'm grateful that you could join us today. Today, our topic is developing critical thinking through discussion groups. I wanted to start by briefly introducing myself. My name is Heidi Healy, and I am a virtual English language fellow. I have been helping with teacher trainings and professional development in China and Mongolia for the last several months from my home in Utah in the western part of the United States. Before being a virtual English language fellow, I was an English language fellow, and I worked in China from 2017 to 2020, where I taught at 2 universities and also helped to run teacher training. I have my master's degree in teaching English to speakers of other languages, and I've been teaching international students for about 10 years now. I'm grateful for this opportunity to discuss with you one of my favorite things to do with students and also a topic that I'm very interested in. Today we're going to start by talking a little bit about critical thinking and what it is, and then we're going to talk about one specific strategy using discussion groups to help students develop critical thinking. This is also a great strategy for helping students with their reading skills, their speaking skills, their listening skills. Really, it can encompass all of those parts of English we want students to work on and to master. So let's start by talking about critical thinking. What is critical thinking and why is it important? One of my favorite definitions of critical thinking is students create and make meaning from their own understanding. I love this because I think it really captures what critical thinking is all about. It's about creating and making meaning. It's about how we understand something and how we can use that understanding to solve problems, to think of new ways of doing things, to improve the things in our communities and the things in our schools, and also to improve ourselves. So critical thinking is something that has gotten a lot of attention in more recent years, both in the English language field as well as in education in general. When we talk about critical thinking, we often look at Bloom's taxonomy. Bloom's taxonomy is a list of different thinking skills. The old version, we start with knowledge, comprehension, application, analysis, synthesis, and evaluation. In the new version, we've changed the words in the order a little bit. So we have remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. I think one of the things that's important to remember about this triangle is we need the bottom to get to the top. We always have to start with understanding and remembering. If we don't have those two key points, we don't have a solid foundation to build everything else on. So making sure that our students have those key basic understanding of remembering and understanding when they're reading or listening to something is really important. We really can't move into the higher thinking of critical thinking without these bottom pieces. These bottom pieces we often call lower order thinking skills, while the top pieces are commonly known as higher order thinking skills. Higher order thinking skills are also critical thinking. Let's talk a little bit more about each of these. So lower order thinking skills are the things we need to understand the basics of what we're reading or listening to. The basic storyline or the meaning of a poem, a story, or a play. Lower order thinking skills often include things like WH questions, vocabulary, and grammar. They include those basic things that we know. This is the foundation, and this is really important that our students have these lower order thinking skills. Some questions or keywords we might use for these kinds of questions are who, what, where, when, do you know, can you identify, name, or list. Again, these questions are focusing on remembering and understanding. Higher order thinking skills are those higher levels of the triangle that I showed you, the higher levels of Bloom's taxonomy. They're used to interpret a text. What does this text really mean? Maybe not the literal meaning, but more of a figurative meaning. Judge a text. Is this a good text? Is the information in it valid and reliable? Create new meaning or create applications. So maybe I read something and then that gives me an idea of something that I could do in my own personal life or in the classroom, or something I could do a project about. So I'm using the text as my foundation, and then it's taking me to bigger ideas and bigger tasks. For higher order thinking questions, I might ask questions like why, what if? I might compare or contrast. How are two things similar? Or how is something different from something else? I might ask students to share their own opinion. Maybe we read an opinion passage in class, and now I want them to share, well, what is your opinion? Do you agree or disagree? I might ask students share other examples of things that fit into a category, or share what they would do in a similar situation. Or maybe I ask them for another solution to a problem that we've read about. These are all different things I can have students question, or I can ask students to help them develop their critical thinking skills. So let's talk a little bit more. We've kind of gotten a broad overview, of lower order thinking skills and higher order thinking skills. But what are some of the specific things I want students to do when they're critical thinking? Well, one of the most important things I can get students to do is ask and answer questions. And not just the questions that appear in their textbook, but get my students to really ask and answer their own questions about the text that we're reading or listening to. I want to help my students use advanced language skills, such as supporting opinions, hypothesizing, being able to say, what if, and discussing topics extensively, meaning being able to discuss topics thoroughly with all the details. I also want students to be thinking, not just memorizing information, not just memorizing the words in the passage, but really thinking about what is the meaning here? What is the author trying to say, or what does the author want me to do? I want students to problem solve. What's another solution? How do I fix this? How can I make this better? I want students to support and defend their opinions. Do they agree with something they read? Do they disagree with something they read? How can they use what they read to support their own opinion or their own ideas? Also, with critical thinking, we can develop understanding of others and developing intercultural competence. And this is really specific to language learning, because often as we're learning a language, we encounter things from other cultures, be it celebrations or food or just even ways of living. And so this allows us to understand others and develop intercultural competence, that ability to talk with, communicate with, interact with people from other cultures. So all of these things are things we can do with our students in the classroom to help them build critical thinking and also help them build their language skills. How do we develop these skills? Well, we can go back to the old adage that practice makes perfect. The reality is none of us are ever perfect though. So I prefer to say practice makes better, or practice makes progress, or practice makes permanent. As we discussed in the Facebook group about vocabulary, using spaced repetition, practicing over time, helps students to memorize vocabulary words. The same is true of critical thinking skills. As we have students practice using those skills over time, they become more permanent for the students. So now that we've talked about what critical thinking is and why it's important, I want to share with you one thing I do with my students to help them develop their critical thinking skills and also to help them develop their reading, writing, listening, and speaking skills. I love using discussion groups with my students. I find them to be great ways of teaching reading and helping students reach higher levels of understanding. They're very motivating and they're collaborative. So they bring my students together and create a good environment in the classroom. When I was teaching in China, my first semester, I used discussion groups in my classroom. We were reading an American novel called Divergent, and each week my students had a short assignment to read a section of the book, and then we discussed it the following week in class. I'll talk a little bit more about exactly how I did this as we go through the next group of slides. But I just wanted to mention here how much my students were motivated and how much they enjoyed this activity. They were always asking me for more time to talk about their books. And when I asked them their favorite activity of this semester, this one was the one that was mentioned the most. They really loved doing this activity. For many of them, this was the first time they had ever read a novel in English, and they felt such a sense of pride at the end of the semester when they had finished reading the book, and they could say, I've read a book in English. So let's talk a little bit more now about discussion groups and how they work. I want to start with this quote. Another way of referring to discussion groups is reading circles or literature circles. I prefer discussion groups because I feel like it's all-encompassing. It could include many different things, but it's the same basic idea. So this quote says, reading circles can be used to reinforce listening, speaking, reading, and writing skills in a supportive and collaborative setting. They encourage students to deepen their understanding of a chosen text, as students are encouraged to discuss plot points, specific language used, and personal experiences and their relation to the text. My two favorite parts of this are the two parts in bold. First, they're used to reinforce all these great language skills in a supportive and collaborative setting. And this is so important for developing good relationships and building a good classroom environment. Second, these kinds of discussions really allow students to deepen their understanding. It allows them to move into more of those critical thinking or deeper levels of understanding of a text. So how exactly do we do this? Well, first of all, we need to choose a text. It might be short, it might be longer. I did a whole book with my Chinese students. We did it every week for the whole semester, but you want to choose your text. Second, you need to assign roles to each student in a group. So you would put your students into small groups, and each student would have a role. Each role has a task, and we'll talk more about those in a minute. Then you need to give your students time to read and do the task. This could be in class or as homework. For my students in China, it was their homework each week to read a section of the text and do their task. And finally, you need to give your students some time to discuss. I always did this in class, but it could also be done outside of class based on your needs. So let's talk a little bit about roles. Roles are important because this way every student has a job. Every student has something that they are responsible for. Some common roles might include a discussion leader, a word finder, a connector, a predictor, a timekeeper, an illustrator, a summarizer, or a recorder or speaker. There are other roles that you could come up with. This list is not all-inclusive. You could add something else that fits your needs for your curriculum or your students. Today, I'm mainly going to focus on the first 5, but I wanted to briefly explain the last 3 to you. An illustrator would be responsible for drawing a picture, a summarizer for writing a summary, and a recorder or a speaker would be responsible for taking notes during the discussion or reporting to the class what was discussed. Let's look at these first 5 roles now in a little more detail. To do this, we're going to use the text News Debate Snowed Out. This text comes from the website readworks.org. You can get a free account here where you can get reading passages for your students. They have lots of different topics and lots of different levels, so I feel like it's a really valuable resource for reading materials. We're going to start just by quickly reading through this text. I wanted to explain 2 words before we start. The first word is a snow day. Snow days, or a snow day, is a day when school is canceled because of bad weather, usually because of snow. In the wintertime, in some parts of the United States, we can get lots of snow. Probably not lots of snow compared to Mongolia, but lots of snow for us. And sometimes that means school gets canceled. This is called a snow day. Generally, students have to make up this day or go to school in the spring to make up for the day that they missed. So a day of their spring break might be taken away, or they might have to go to school on a Saturday. The other word I wanted to describe is ditch. To ditch something is to throw it away or to cancel it. So let's go ahead. I'm going ahead and just read this to you. Follow along as we read. News debate, snowed out. Students at Misinnawa Valley School in Western Ohio have to say so long to snow days. The white powder may fall, but students won't be able to spend the day sledding or playing in the snow. Classes will be in session online. Officials say that holding electronic work days, E-days, will help students keep up with their studies and familiarize them with virtual learning. It will also prevent requiring students to make up days later in the year. Some students argue that it's not fair to ditch snow days, however. They say that snow days give them a much needed break. They also note that missing a day here and there is not enough to put them behind. In addition, some educators point out that not everyone has access to home computers and that sometimes siblings have to share computers. Should students be required to work on snow days? Current event student reporters Jordan Dewar and Logan Gegg shoveled it out. Okay, this is our text. Now let's look at our different tasks we might assign our students based on their roles. The first role is discussion leader. This person is responsible for writing 3 to 5 questions related to the text. Generally, when I'm teaching my students to use discussion groups, I would take a good chunk of class one day, maybe even the entire class, to talk about asking different types of questions. I mainly talk about thin questions or lower order thinking skill questions and thick questions or higher order thinking skill questions. Thin questions are easy to find. They're remember and understand questions. The answers are usually right there in the text. Questions like who, what, when, or where. Thick questions require students to think, infer, or use their background knowledge. They may be questions like why, how, what if, or questions that require students to give their own opinion, problem solve, or compare and contrast. So for the discussion leader, if I need to write 3 to 5 questions about snowed out, I might write questions like these. What is one benefit of an E-day? Or what is one problem with E-days? These are both thin questions because I can find the answer directly in the text. For example, what is one benefit of E-days? Right here's the answer. Students keep up with their studies and familiarize them with virtual learning, and they don't have to make up days later. What is one problem with them? I have the answer right here. Not everyone has access to home computers, and sometimes siblings have to share computers. Both of these would be considered thin questions because they're right there in the text. I could also ask questions about when is this, or where is this, excuse me, where is it? It's in Ohio. Ohio is a state in the US. What is it about? Well, it's about snow days. My second 2 questions are thick questions. Do you think students should have to do school online on snow days? This asks students to share their own opinion based on their experience. What do they think? Or how could they solve the problem of students without computers? I can ask my students to brainstorm solutions for what to do with these students that don't have computers. These might be some of the questions I could come up with if my role was discussion leader for this text. My next role is the role of word finder. Word finder is responsible for vocabulary. They're responsible to find and define 3 to 5 words from the passage. For example, from snowed out, I might find these words. Snow day, a day when school is canceled because of the snow. Makeup, in this case, a makeup day is a replacement day. Virtual learning, learning on the computer and internet. Siblings, brothers and sisters. Depending on my level of students, they could also provide a translation into their L1. My next role is the role of connector. My connector is responsible for making connections. Generally, we talk about 3 different types of connections. Again, I would take some time in class to explain this role, and we would talk about making connections and practice it before I gave my students this discussion group task. The first type of connection we might make is a text to self connection. This is when we make a connection between the text and something in our personal life. Another kind of connection is a text to text connection. This is when we make a connection between 2 texts, maybe between 2 books or between 2 stories we've read. Our final connection is a text to world connection. This is a connection between the text and what is happening in the larger world. Now, world can be interpreted as in different cases. It might be just the world of your school or just the world of Mongolia, or it might be the world, as in situations that are impacting all the people in the world. So in the article Snowed Out, what are some connections that I might make? First, I made a personal connection. Whenever I hear the word snow day, it makes me think of a snow day we had when I was going to university. One day while I was at university, we got a lot of snow. It was past my knees, I think. So they canceled all classes for the day because they didn't have enough time to get the sidewalks cleared so students could safely make it to classes. We spent the entire day playing in the snow. A text to world connection I might make might be where it talks about virtual learning. Right now, due to the pandemic, many people are engaging in virtual learning. They're learning on their computers, they're learning from home. And so this is definitely something that connects to what's happening in the world right now. Finally, a text-to-text connection I might make. When I read about the problem of students not having computers, it made me think of a similar problem we faced here in Utah. I remember reading a newspaper article about a teacher who had many students without computers or the internet. And so this teacher would drive around and take worksheets to the students so that they would not fall behind in their schoolwork. My next role is the role of predictor. My predictor needs to ask what will happen next, or what will happen as a result of the story. In the case of Snowed Out, based on just the first 2 paragraphs of the article, I think the rest of the article will be a debate, and people will talk about some of the pros and cons of snow days and virtual days. As a bigger prediction, I think the rule in Ohio will probably stay. I think that e-days and virtual learning will become more commonplace and more popular in the future. Finally, I have the role of timekeeper. My timekeeper needs to read the article, but the real role of the timekeeper is to help during the discussion group to make sure that everyone has a chance to share, that one person doesn't take all the time. The timekeeper is to keep the group on time and make sure each person has his or her part to share. A timekeeper doesn't have a lot to do with the reading. They still need to read the reading so they can participate in the discussion, but their main role again comes during the discussion to make sure everyone has a chance to share. This can be a great job if a student needs a little bit of a break, or if you have a lower student that might take longer to read the article. This could be another great role for that student. So we've gone through each of the different roles that we might assign to students. So now let's try this. I'm going to have you form a group of 4 to 5 teachers and assign each person a role. I'll review the roles in just a second. You're going to read a passage called Snow Day Fever and do the assigned task for your role. So first, in your group, read and do your task. You should have a discussion leader, a word finder, a connector, a predictor, and a timekeeper. If you only have 4 people in your group, you can use the first 4 roles and don't assign someone to be a timekeeper. You take some time, read the passage, and do your task. Then second, you'll have a discussion with your group, and each person can share their tasks. One note, discussion leaders, your responsibility is to start a discussion. So you should ask the questions and let your group answer the questions. Okay, we'll give you some time to try this now. Use the text Snow Day Fever and try having a discussion group with some of your fellow teachers. Great. I hope your groups went really well. This is when I really wish I could be with you because I would love to hear your discussion about this experience. I'd now like you to take a few minutes and discuss what happened in your groups. What were good things about your groups? What were some challenges about your groups? Are there any things you would change? Have you ever done a similar activity? Take a few minutes and discuss. Finally, I wanted to end by discussing some other applications to this. I like to use the word discussion groups rather than reading circles or literature circles, because I think these kinds of teaching methods can be useful not just with reading, but with listening and in other kinds of situations. One thing we could do is we could have students do a presentation. I had some students do this in one of the schools I taught at. The students prepared a short presentation about a reading or a video of their choice. For example, in one class I taught, the students had to choose a video and prepare a presentation about it. They were responsible to prepare a short pre-listening activity, go over vocabulary. We then watched the video in class, and then the students were responsible for leading a discussion about the video by asking thin and thick questions. Similar to my experience with reading the book, I was a little bit nervous when I started doing this, but I was really impressed by my students. They asked great questions, and we talked about some really interesting topics in class. I'll never forget one class when their pre-listening activity was their listening was talking about labels. So in their pre-listening activity, they had the students stick labels on me. They literally put sticky notes on me that had different words they thought described me. It was a really interesting activity. And then afterwards, the students had a really meaningful discussion. As I mentioned previously, you could do this with a book. I've done this with higher level learners with books, like I did with my students in China. I've also done modified discussion groups with some of my lower level students. With a book, each student would read a section of text each week and complete a task. They had time in class to discuss the reading, and their roles rotated each week. So one week a student was the discussion leader, the next week that student was the word finder, and the next week that student was the connector, the next week the student was the predictor. This way each student had an opportunity to focus on each of these different tasks. And again, I was really impressed with my students and the vocabulary and the questions that they came up with. Finally, a few adaptations for beginners. At the very beginning, I might have students just focus on asking thin questions. So who, what, where, when questions. Or I might even provide the questions for the students at the beginning. Give them a reading and I provide the questions, or I even use the questions that are already in the book. But instead of just having students answer the questions, I encourage them to talk to each other and answer the questions in a discussion group with each other. Even my low-level students were able to do this with some guidance from me. And again, it was an activity that they really enjoyed and found very helpful and motivating. So, what new ideas did you learn today? And how can you apply these ideas into your classroom? Again, I want to mention the Facebook group, the AC Methodology Workshop Series. I really loved those of you that were able to participate in our Facebook Live events this past week. It was great to be able to see you and hear from you and hear your examples and the ways that you are teaching vocabulary. I'd love to hear from you this week. What are questions you have? What are things you're doing to teach reading in your classes? And also, what are methods you're using to teach online? I think teaching online is a challenge for all of us right now. And if you have an activity that works really well, we'd love to hear about it. Finally, I will be doing another Facebook Live event. They're Thursday, December 10th. I will be on at 9:00 p.m. I may also be doing another time, and I will post that in the Facebook group. I hope to see several of you Thursday and that we can have another engaging conversation. Thank you all again for being here, for giving of your time to spend time with me and learning more about English methodology to become better teachers of English. Here are my sources, a couple from about reading circles. Again, I also wanted to re-emphasize this readworks.org website. Again, it's free to sign up and there's tons of free reading materials there, a really excellent website. And thank you all again for being here, and I hope to see you on Thursday.